because it's a different context. It's not the same. Self-defense is not the same as MMA. There's a lot of crossover, but there is differences. I tell people all the time, the way I would basically categorize these two things is MMA, while it is a sport, you are dealing with hyper-violence, you're very good at it, but you are in a marathon. You have a referee that's going to tell you yes, no, maybe so, but you are in a marathon and the variables are more controlled. If we go to a self-defense occurrence where somebody breaks into your house, you can't have the same approach of like, I'm just going to jab. That's not necessarily going to end the conflict. And we also don't know what variables they're bringing to the table. No one's fighting fairly, right? And trying to control somebody who doesn't want it isn't playing the same game. I've said this before. Sometimes sparring people that have absolutely zero idea of what they're doing and they're just going on wailing everywhere is harder to deal with than someone that has some training.
Yeah.
They have patterns when they're training that they've learned, especially depending on where they are. So, you know, I want my dogs to represent the same thing. I want to be able to take my dog down the alley and know that if something happens, he's not the other side of the alley waiting for me to figure it out.
I've always drawn that comparison between, to me, bite sport and disciplines like boxing, kickboxing, you know, even MMA. It's a simulation of a fight, but there's obviously rules that aren't going to exist in a real fight. But the patterns and the skills and the type of person that is successful in that tends to also be successful. There's so much crossover. And bite sport for me, like people are like, oh, it's just a sport. And which sport is the more real sport and blah, blah, blah. And we can argue about that till the cows come home. But a good dog is a good dog. Good training is good training. And I have found it, whether it's a dog that does bite suit sport, whether it's a dog that does sleeve sport, if it's a good dog, getting it to do things like civil scenarios, whether it's muzzle fighting, hidden sleeves, home invasion type scenarios, all of that stuff, it's not a problem.
No.
It's actually like almost too easy because the control is already there. The dog is used to, you know, working in that high level of arousal, being in that fight, doing all the things he needs to do. So now when you just change some of the variables and be like, yeah, man, you're going to have to jump in through this car window and bite this guy, it's not a problem.
It's not the transition in the heart. We did a muzzle fight with Hammy. Oh, man. I guess summer. And I was like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, he's never done this. He was real good.
Yeah, when they're about...
He did a great job. He was about it.
Yeah, when they're about that life. And you know, that's something I think a lot of people, when they look at sport dogs, they're like, and somehow we're talking about sport versus real. But it's funny because it's like, for a dog to be good at dog sport, right, in the higher levels, and let's face it, yes, there is a push nowadays for more compliant dogs and dogs that are easier to handle, dogs that require less pressure, you know, especially in certain sports. There is kind of a lean now heading in that direction. But still fundamentally, you know, if you want to be on the top level, you must have a good dog. You know, you must have a good dog, right? It might not be the perfect dog. It might not be a dog that should be bred, but you must have a good dog that has fundamental tools. Otherwise, you're not going to see that success in the high levels. And that's what I like about bite sport.
It's cool. This is my first time, like, getting into bite sport. Obviously, this is my first sport dog. And I really like how the worlds mesh and to see the brain of the dog work and know that they're still about real violence. And it goes back to, I'll take any of my MMA guys into a street fight with me any day because they're real. They're about that life for the most part. I mean, you get the odd few that doesn't want a part of that.
They've experienced the stress. Well, they have a foundation that they can fall back on.
It's dealing with stress and it's dealing with the ability of how to overcome stress.
Yes.
And the good ones will always see it. Like, and again, one of our guys, Surrey, just fought in the UFC in Toronto in January.
Awesome fight.
Great fight. He should have won the fight, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But he looked phenomenal. And one of the things he said to Lyndon cornered him. Lyndon and Gavin have been his main coaches forever. And one of the things he said to Lyndon, I didn't know I had it in me to do that, to be a dog. And it's like, bro, I've known watching you. I'm not your head coach by any means, but I've seen you spar every week for 5 years. I knew when the going got tough, you're going to bite down. He's about it, right? Like he has that in him naturally. So for him, it's the same thing as a dog. Like, you know, they got it or they don't. And it's the moments like that where you're like, oh, you really did. Like,